Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our second part of our webinar series on Android OS migration. We see there's still a few people here that are logging in, so we'll give them just a couple minutes to get settled, and then we'll begin shortly. Okay, we'll get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our second part of a three-part series on Android OS migration. On behalf of Lowry Solutions and Zebra Technologies, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. Today, we will be discussing OS migration, a look ahead. And in case you missed it, the first part of our webinar series titled, What is OS Migration? Can be found on the Lowry Solutions website under the Resources tab. So if you want to catch a recording of that, let not your heart be troubled, it's there for you. Today, I'm going to be joined by David Wolf, who is the Director of Professional Services at Lowry Solutions, and Kevin Lowlick, who's the North American Regional Manager for Software at Zebra Technologies. Today, we'll be discussing a few topics, such as what does end of life and end of support mean for your company? We'll be discussing retooling and upgrading applications for the new OS, and upgrading hardware to fully utilize Android enterprise platforms. We'll also discuss how to maximize employee productivity, and then how to configure everything across your business seamlessly to reduce expenditures. I'm now going to pass it off to Kevin to do a quick recap of what we discussed in the first webinar, and then he'll be joining us, Dave will be joining us after him to take a deeper dive into the OS migration.
Very good, thanks Nick, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy days to learn a little bit more about this migration over to new platforms. What we want to do, like we said, is kind of give a recap on the migration, as well as look ahead on the considerations for the next generation of mobile. And for future sessions, stay tuned for a third part of this series on developing your OS migration strategy and coming up with a roadmap for success. And that next section will be on October 17th. But just to kind of summarize a lot of what we talked about last time, there's change happening in the industry. There is a big impact. In fact, studies have been done, source information here at the bottom of the slide, but studies have been done by Randstad, PwC, and so on the fact that our on-demand economy these days is driving significant impact in the supply chain. In fact, when we think about the timing of these supply chain impacts, as this study indicates, sometime in that 2020, 2022 timeframe, you can see there's going to be a tremendous demand for additional workers. And it's not necessarily going to be solved by robotics or automation and so on. It's going to be resolved by helping to apply overall new efficiencies in mobile computing to a lot of these operations. So that's premise number one that's impacting our change. The other premise that's impacting our change is the fact that Windows 10 mobile is gone. There's no Microsoft migration path from Windows CE and Windows Mobile, our traditional legacy platforms, into something that's next from Microsoft. They don't have a mobile strategy. In October of last year, they pretty much put their stake in the ground and said that we are no longer going to do any further development on our mobile platform. We are going to focus our efforts on providing a Microsoft experience regardless of the underlying mobile device itself, be it Android or iOS or even their desktop. It's all about driving a Microsoft experience. The other influence that we have that's forcing change is the way that modern computing sets expectations in our end users of how these devices are supposed to behave in their hands. Right now, recent studies indicate that the majority of the users that have legacy applications are not satisfied with the way they operate. For me, as a developer, looking at this would cause me to sit up and really take note as far as how I'm impacting my overall productivity of my end users. In this case, knowing that the existing user base out there, almost 60% of them are somewhat dissatisfied to very dissatisfied with the overall operation of their businesses, which at the end of the day really impact the outcome of the services that we're providing to our end customers. The other influence here, knowing that the change of expectations on how computer technology is supposed to behave has measured impacts on the way that businesses operate. We have done studies that indicate that taking an existing application, modernizing the way that the user interacts with it, turning it into a more touch-centric interface, has measurable gains in productivity, measurable impact on lowering the error rate, and surprisingly, even measured gains on typing speed. But if you think about it, think about the way you use your mobile device in your outside work experience. You're used to typing on a non-index keyboard. You're used to, using features like autocorrect and so on. All of these things in a modern mobile framework all add up to increase accuracy and productivity. So, we've got a lot of influences here. A lot of things are impacting our ability to execute, and then you add in the element of security, knowing that organizations these days have a significant focus on making sure that their mobile environment is indeed secure. Right now with Windows CE, it's catch as catch can if they're able to do it. In fact, there's a link to Microsoft's support site here. It says Microsoft may be unable to provide security updates for older products, leaving them at risk in the face of more demanding security requirements. And if you remember from our last session, we did take a deep dive as far as what some of those different attack surfaces are, and how simply hiding behind a firewall or thinking that you're secure because you're obscure really isn't the norm anymore. We have to really take into account what the mobile threat surface looks like, and all the different vectors are being exposed to them along those surfaces. So, at the end of the day, security is becoming very top of mind when making decisions to move forward. That's where our execution of a security strategy around LifeGuard comes into play, because when you think about the investments that you're making in technology overall, you're making investments for the long haul. You're wanting to make sure that the money that you spend today is money well spent when you look at your investment 5 years down the road. In order to protect that investment during the life cycle that you have it deployed, if you look at this in the middle here, add the element of security on top of that. One of the things that LifeGuard brings to the table is the ability to provide a long-term security strategy to protect the investment that you make in order to be able to assure a productive and secure environment for the long haul. Our customers, our partners are really looking at this now as kind of the perfect storm, the opportunity to modernize, knowing full well that the world is moving past Windows Mobile and Windows CE, knowing full well that in order to be able to derive additional efficiencies with mobile computing platforms, we have to make those platforms work in the ways that users expect them to work. It's a great opportunity to improve that overall user experience, to innovate on new technology, to lever additional features in the platforms like Simulscan for example, being able to capture multiple barcodes with a single press of the trigger and map those barcodes into the appropriate fields of the application, or even being able to turn the mobile device into also a communication platform. Think about now being able to use your mobile computer not only as a data collection device to drive efficiency in your workflow, but also think of it, being able to use it as a walkie-talkie as well. In a sense, providing a controlled Nextel-like experience with the mobile device in the hands of the users that you've got out there. Knowing that there is no future path for Microsoft in a mobile environment. I say that, but also when you look at vehicle mounts and tablets, there still will be a Windows 10, full desktop play. But when it comes to mobile and devices that really drive efficiency, the market direction is clear. It is all on Android. If you look at not only Zebra, but the other players in this market, the Honeymax, Datalogics, and so on, they're all moving towards an Android platform as well. So it's not just us that's doing it. The fact is that migration is here, and it is here to stay, and the direction is clearly Android. Zebra has been doing this Android platform for a number of years already. We started this journey back in 2011, so we've got a good 7 or 8 years under our belt when it comes to being able to provide a secure, protected, manageable environment that adds additional features, capabilities, and workflow to your operations overall. So, the opportunity is ripe, folks. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to David, so he can bring you all the highlights in order to be able to move things forward. So, David, I'm passing the baton over to you, and it's all yours.
Okay, let me do that. Thank you, Kevin. Can you see that okay?
Got it on my side.
Great. So yeah, and thank you, and thank you for the recap. And it's important as we touch on these three this three-part series that we kind of make the connection between them. So in this part, we'll be looking at key considerations when making the move to Android. So we also wanted to touch on the tools and resources that we kind of provide our customers to help navigate the process, right? It can be complex, it can be time consuming. So we're really here to help. We also want to mention that migrations overall, they can be challenging to get through. There's a lot of pieces in play. There's a lot of groups within your companies in play. So again, Lowry, Zebra, we're here to help you. We have resources available to us. We have expertise, and some of that stuff we'll be sharing towards the end of the webinar here. But I just want to kind of lay that groundwork that's what we're going to be talking about today. As we move to part 3 at the end of this, we're looking to equip you with a roadmap for a successful Windows Mobile, Windows CE migration to Android. So best-in-class partnerships. Obviously, there's a reason we're partnering with Zebra on this discussion, because they were really at the forefront of the move to Android. They were early in the process, and I think at this point, just about every one of their offerings for every area of your business has an Android offering. So that's the direction. That's where the engineering dollars are being spent. That's where we're seeing the industry go. As Kevin mentioned, some of the competitors out there are also doing the same exact migration. They're moving to Android. So one key point we want to call out is you'll also want to take a look at the integration tool sets that those providers offer. That's a key differentiator. Obviously for Zebra, and it helps get that device into your environment much easier. Another thing you want to take a look at is how can I protect the life cycle, right? I'm used to a rugged device. I'm using it for maybe 5 years. Well, that's not what I'm used to with the phone in my pocket, right? You know, I'm upgrading maybe every year, at least the OS, and then I'm upgrading the hardware maybe every 2-3 years. So one of the things you want to look at is how is that OEM protecting that life cycle on Android to make sure that I can keep it secure, have the patches in place, and those sorts of things. So those can be a major difference down the road. So always keep an eye on that. Let me go to the next one here. So we did have a good run. So Windows Mobile, Windows CE, you know, 15 million plus rugged mobile units since 2010, and it's 99% of those have been on Windows Mobile, Windows CE. So everybody's used to this product. Everybody's you know, probably had it in their environment, but those days are changing. You know, we're seeing the dates. It's already been announced, and we're seeing the engineering dollars shift, and that roadmap is fully established. So in 2020, 2021, that will be the end of even service patches for CE and Windows Mobile. I'll share the dates with you in a second here, but and that shift significantly impacts when you go to buy your next you make your next hardware selection. It's really a shift in the industry, but it's also, you know, it ends up being a shift in your business, right? So important to think about making that move early. Just a couple key, you know, questions to ask yourself. Number one, you know, what devices are available? We're certainly here to help you through that, but it's something you have to decide. You have to decide, okay, you know, what are my needs today compared to, you know, what I'm refreshing? It's, you know, how different does that look? You know, another question, how do we structure our business moving forward? You know, you may have applications that are maybe out of date or you don't even use anymore. So that's a consideration, and that's the time to do it, right? Is when you're going to go through a refresh. You know, let's consider really looking at the entire environment. And then once you do have that captured, you know, naturally, do I need to rebuild my applications? Do I need to replace my applications? Those sorts of questions. And then probably the most important question is, you know, how can I do this on my timeline? You know, if you wait to the very end and, you know, you're kind of up against the clock, it's just going to increase the pressure, increase the challenge for you. So sunset date. So I know Kevin covered these in part one. It's worth sharing again. We did add in here the you know, Windows Embedded 8 handheld. I think we had in the last one, but also the Windows 10 mobile. Through the last couple years, we saw all the different lines start to converge into the Windows 10 line, and that looks like it was going to be a solid follow-on to the Windows Mobile, Windows CE product set, but that too is also coming to an end for non-tablet mobile devices. So you're going to obviously still be able to get Windows 10 on laptops, tablets, those sorts of things, but you know, handheld devices is where they're stopping support. So starting with Windows 10, Microsoft made updates available, including security updates for 24 months after the lifecycle start date. So just a quick example, if that release that you were on was released on October 2017, then that end date would be in 2019. So kind of gives you an idea of how they're doing it with the whole Windows 10 line on mobile. So and I'll just mention, you can still find Windows-based devices. They're still out there. They're still being manufactured, but all the new, as mentioned, all the new engineering dollars and research and development and testing, all that's going towards you know, the Android devices. So where do I go from here? You know, we talked about some of the options. We've kind of talked about there's one clear-cut winner, and that seems to be Android. Obviously, Apple's not going to put iOS on somebody else's hardware. It's not their model. And Android is a very solid, robust, up-to-date environment that was kind of a perfect fit for a go-forward operating system for rugged devices as well as consumer devices. It's very popular. And what Android allowed Zebra to do is incorporate a modern OS with that open integration into things like scanners, imagers, keypads, hot swappable batteries, to do the things that you've come to expect with rugged devices with a modern OS. So, you know, your cell phone in your pocket, probably, you know, you have to crack the case to change the battery, if you even do that. Most people just toss them and get a new one. You're looking for a longer life cycle when you're talking with the rugged hardware. So you want that, you want those batteries, you want to keep up with maintenance and those sorts of things. So good news is, happy to report that that we've seen a significant uptick in user adoption on Android, simply because it's pervasive. It's already in that employee's pocket. You know, they've already touched it, used it, and they're already comfortable with it. So it's been easier to make that transition. I think we're at a point now where if you put a Windows mobile device in somebody's hand, that's where they start to, you know, get a little more confused. So it really has been, you know, an easier transition than maybe in years past. So, you know, we touched a little bit on migrating on your timeline. We can't stress that enough. If you get behind, and you know, this isn't comparable to Y2K, but if you get behind a timeline where something is coming to an end, yeah, I mean, it's just the end of security. It's the end of the engineering support. The devices will work, yes, but you know, we're talking about staying ahead of the curve as far as adoption of a new environment, a new OS, making sure that you get the training out in front, make sure your application testing and everything goes well, so that you're not in a situation where you know, maybe you've got to purchase more devices or additional devices, and you can no longer get that Windows version of it. So then you're having to put together an image for a new device on a timeline outside of your control. So, you know, planning now will allow you to do this on your schedule, gives you the time to evaluate, test, and plan. So, you know, we're here to help you with that, but it's just obviously a best practice that we know works. So one of the first considerations is obviously the resistance to change, right? So you may have your IT department, your security department, purchasing, even your end users. There may be pushback to either a whole changing across the board, or even just starting to introduce it and test it. You know, a lot of questions come up at that point, and that's really the time, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, it's really the time to identify the overall business needs, interview the key stakeholders and around the technology, who's using it, what applications are they using, even reviewing your IT governance policy around mobile. There may be there may be requirements that if a device is no longer supported from a security perspective, that you need to make a change and migrate accordingly. So governance can come into play. And you know, what you want to do is you just want to, you know, compile that list, gather all that information, including the device types and the applications that you use, and start working through it. And again, that's what we're here to help you with. We can help you with those decisions, point you in the right direction of devices, applications. You know, we work with best of breed partners on the software side as well. So those are the things that'll kind of give you a head start as we're talking through a migration, an OS migration. So what to expect with Android? So another major consideration when deploying Android is obviously the rapid OS release cadence that that Google adheres to. So you see the distribution chart on the left there. Google drops a new release pretty much every year, if not sooner. And if you're not given the option to remain on a specific version that would still be supported, that's going to require a lot of touch, and it may be confusing to your users. It may break applications. It's hard to say what that new release will do. So, you know, it's a consideration, strong consideration that, okay, now I have an OS in my environment that it needs more maintenance, needs more touch, if you will. So Kevin touched on it a little bit earlier, but Zebra addressed this with lifeguards. So basically, when Google releases a new dessert release, they're only guaranteeing that previous release for 36 months, which that's pretty good. In the rugged space, consumer space, that's great. Rugged space, we're more used to and accustomed to, 5 years, sometimes longer. So what Lifeguard will let you do there is bridge that gap. They'll continue to provide security patches for an additional 24 months on top of the 36. That gives you your 5-year cycle. And then at that point, you should be thinking about maybe a new device, or the different considerations with as your devices age, maintenance, the life cycle side of that, the cost that goes around the life cycle of that device as it gets older, downtime, those sorts of things. So just a note that Lifeguard is included with Zebra's OneCare service contracts. So that's how you get access to those files, and you can you can plan the migration. You can stay on a specific version, get the patches for that, or you can it lets you extend the length of your of a transition if you're going to go to the next version. So on the slide here, we talk about application migration. We're going to talk about that in the next few slides here, but the good news is, and you can see it in the chart in the upper right there, that the pool of Android developers is healthy and growing. So it's pervasive in the industry. Android's everywhere now, and developers are catching on. So device management, we're at a point where we really consider device management, at least we do, as a requirement when deploying mobile computers. And again, we'll touch on that in a little bit here. Application modernization. So, obviously this is something that as you're moving into a new device and a new OS, many times if you have native built for Windows devices, Windows mobile devices, you're going to need to make that transfer. So that can come at a cost. We do understand that. Again, it's important that you're doing this on your timeline, because right now is an ideal time to clearly define each application use case, update them accordingly. You may have apps you no longer use, so if that's something that you need to make part of your assessment and deprecate those, that's the time to do it. So we have industry experts here at Lowry that we can help you through that. We can guide you through that process. We do work with a number of application developers, custom and prepackaged, so we can help point you in the right direction. Another thing I want to point out here is the development tools have come a long way in the last few years. So if you noticed, Microsoft purchased Xamarin, which was Xamarin was kind of the leading multi-platform development tool that was allowing you to develop an application for in one interface and have it target multiple device types. So Xamarin is now integrated into VSTS or Microsoft's Visual Studio tool set, and that's really helping bridge the gap for developers that are maybe in-house and they're Windows developers, or even outside firms using that tool set. So, you know, even Microsoft's steering in that direction a little bit, at least on their development side. So, we touched on, you know, we're seeing the user adoption around Android being less of a hurdle than in the past when we put Windows mobile devices in the hands of a new employee. You know, again, the demographics have changed a little bit, and you know, folks are comfortable with Android. So that familiarity with Android OS does provide a smoother transition to the rugged devices using the same navigation. So that's been helpful. And of course, we've always heard that happy employees are productive employees. So the last thing we want is users to get frustrated with their OS and not being familiar with it and trying to do their job and not being able to do that. So. TE, so terminal emulation, we still see a fair amount of terminal emulation in the market. There's still a significant amount of deployments, both warehouse, retail store systems, and the good thing is there's in a lot of cases it's already pre-installed, but there are terminal emulation clients already available for just about every flavor of Android. In recent years here. So with the latest generation, it allows you can do it a couple ways. You can build a more rich, intuitive user interface for these clients. You can do an all-touch interface for a new device. You can kind of shift it into an HTML interface, and these tool sets help you do that. So you know, that's really their goal, is to use these tools to accelerate the modernization efforts, and kind of take that piece off your hand. And I'll just give you an example. You know, we had a customer where a set of screen rewrites for TE was going to take them about, they were quoted anywhere from 6 to 18 months, depending on the complexity. And that customer can be done in a matter of weeks now versus months. So it at least gets you up and running. And then yes, there's some fine tuning and some tweaking around that, but you know, the translation is done really, really well. So you know, for those that are familiar with Wavelink or now Avani, they offer tools that do exactly this. They have a rapid migration tool that you can pretty much provide the same green screen interface that you're used to, and but on a modern device. So it kind of, you know, it looks and feels like the modern device, not so much like the green screen, but it's really just a handoff. It's just interpreting it different. And then they also have a rapid modernization tool that lets you change it to almost like a HTML5 based application where you can shape those screens and lay them out in a sense that you can't even tell you're doing terminal emulation behind the scenes. So really, really nice offering there. And finally, if you're going from a device with a keypad and you're going to maybe you want to put a device that's just all touch in your user's hands, they have that as well, where you can make that translation, get the keyboards and the function keys operating properly in an all touch display without a keypad needed. So worth mentioning that you know, we're seeing mobile malware now significantly outpacing that of desktop malware. Mobile devices are considered extremely valuable targets, as the information that can be harvested from those is very valuable, whether it be personal or whether it be business. It's just a plethora of information. So this is again why maintaining the security updates on the mobile devices is so critical. You know, we mentioned earlier that we consider mobile device management tools mandatory, and that's not because Android is less secure. That's just not the case. It's simply because you want to keep up with those security patches, with those security releases, maintain that OS the very best you can to keep this to keep your devices secure. You know, nobody wants the headline that they've been hacked. So with that, I will hand it back to Nick here, and he's going to go through a couple items himself.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Let me just get the screen up here. Okay, and then let me know as soon as you can see the screen with the slide.
Yep, I see it.
Perfect. So segueing perfectly into what Dave just mentioned about security and the mobile devices being so vulnerable, it's really important to note that all of these devices are connected to a network, which means every single one of these are an access point that can infiltrate into a network if it's not defended properly. I currently work as a product manager at Lowry, but I was an IT manager, and I have a background and having to manage devices and doing deployments and migrations. And I know it can be really an intimidating thing, but there's ways to really mitigate that. And I want to start with a question that relates to the security of your deployment. And that is, if you could raise your hand, if you know the difference between EMM and MDM, if you've heard those terms before. Okay. And if you guessed that one of the acronyms has two M's and an E, and the other has two M's and a D, you are correct. I'm just kidding. That's not why. MDM and Enterprise Mobility Management are essentially interchangeable terms. MDM was used a lot more in the past, and you'll start to see it more now as the real buzzword is EMM, or Enterprise Mobility Management. And some examples of why this is so critical and what it does is you have business needs like the ability to resolve mobile issues remotely, because it's not as simple as it used to be, where you have a device that's at a plant that's in another state, and then the IT guy, you know, if he's not there, you got to fly him in, fix the device, or someone tries to do it on the floor. We don't live in that world anymore. We live in the world now where you have these enterprise mobility management systems like the SODI Mobi controls, the Microsoft Intunes, the Avanti wavelengths. These allow you to centrally control all of these devices that are across your entire business. And the reason that these are so important, for example, the ability to resolve those issues remotely, is because you're mitigating a ton of costs by being able to just log in remotely through a portal through one of these services, such as Mobi Control. The other thing is you want to minimize the downtime of the mobile asset. So it's a really nice way to have a centralized view of all of your devices and all of the locations, the health statuses, get the alerts, be able to lock down policies. If anything is breached, you can make sure you lock down that device before it infects other devices. That's really critical to be able to have that. Other is to accelerate your mobile deployments. So you can leverage EMM as a tool to expedite your migration to Android OS migration, so that you have like your wireless LAN settings, your device profiles, and your policies. Instead of having to touch each device, you're able to push those over a network in certain instances, which can save a ton of time, and I've done it from experience, so I definitely know. Visibility into your mobile workforce. Again, the ability to collect the device information and usage, that's critical. You want to be able to know exactly where all of your devices are, how they're reporting, what the productivity of each person is, and be able to get those KPIs captured. And then finally, you want to provide device OS and application management. And that means things like pushing security updates and pushing the patches so that you're not vulnerable. So when things that happen, like the WannaCry incident, which was a cryptoware attack that happened last year, it affected hundreds of businesses across the world. It would infect a device, it would lock it down, and then you'd have to pay a ransom in Bitcoin to hopefully try and unlock your device. And if that got on your network because you didn't push a security update, you don't want to be the person answering that call to your boss, that's for sure. So just to summarize why EMM is so critical in today's day and age, and really non-negotiable today, it's because of the efficiency of your asset reporting. your remote control ability to get into the devices. So your silent application installations, your configuration of the security settings, the profiles, the connectivity, the device restrictions. You can do things like file synchronizations, which are really convenient, especially for backups and things like that. Data collection, and then as mentioned, the location tracking, and in some instances you can even do geofencing, where you can set up a perimeter. So if a device leaves a site outside of a specified zone, you could automatically lock it so that you could assume it's stolen or it's out of place and it shouldn't be there, so it's not compromised. And now we're going to kind of move into the user training that Dave had touched on earlier. And it was funny when he said that if you handed somebody a Windows mobile phone, that they probably wouldn't know what to do with it, because it's true. It's such a small amount of the market share. But if you give a toddler, or if any of you have kids and you give them a tablet that has Android on it, they're immediately buying a bunch of stuff on a game like Tomatoes or whatever else these kids are playing on these games today. But to that point, you don't need to train as much with Android because of the familiarity that we all have with it. So when you introduce an Android-based device across your business, you're really minimizing the disruption, because you're lowering workforce cost by shortening the training time and by reducing employee turnover. Because I know that if I go into a place that's operating like it's the 1990s and I'm just typing buttons on a green screen and making a lot of mistakes, that can be frustrating. Sometimes you just want to do things more conveniently. And now that we have that ability to seamlessly make that migration into Android and do things like the terminal emulation that Dave had mentioned, and be able to work with a device you're familiar with, like it's your phone, you'll really see a lot of positive reception from your employees. Training considerations. So again, to summarize, the legacy technology. I'm going to put on my consumer hat for a second here, just as an analogy, but if you have like a support issue, like device downtime or end of life, where the product, it takes longer to be serviced. In a consumer instance, this would be like going to Best Buy with a Windows XP computer and saying, hey, I think I have a problem with this, can you fix it? They're probably going to look at you with a raised eyebrow and say no, because it's end of life, it's no longer supported, and we've definitely moved on from that timeline. So those support issues are essentially eliminated by upgrading to Android OS technology, and that allows you to, again, reduce the training time with the intuitive interfaces and the familiar and popular OSs that we all use every day. And then also with the legacy technology too, I think that Dave had mentioned that a productive employee is a happy employee and vice versa. So that's true. And when you actually feel like you're being productive, you do work better and you do have a better time at work. And when you're working on an old device and things are really frustrating, I mean, that can really start to chip away at you after a while. So the new technology, it definitely raises job satisfaction. It speeds up the end user adoption, and the users can definitely do their jobs a lot faster and much more efficiently. And touching on this training consideration, I just want to mention one of our customers that recently went through an Android migration. They're a tier 1 automotive supplier, and they do manufacturing, and they have a big warehouse, multiple locations. They run Windows CE on all of their mobile devices across the entire company. They had a lot of trepidation into moving to Android for not only the training reasons, but compatibility issues and things like that. So we reached out to them and we offered to bring an Android device on site with them and show them how compatible your ERP systems and your business workflows are with Android, that it's not so disruptive as you think it's going to be moving from Windows to Android. So a lot of people don't know this, but you can still access Windows RDP applications from Android. It's simply a matter of putting the RDP app onto your Android device, and you can log in just like it was a Windows computer. Another thing that you can do that David mentioned is your TE emulation, so that you can access all your telnet settings, so you can get to your green screen applications if you need to. That comes built in with Avanti. So it's actually really convenient, and it took us all of about 15 minutes to get the demo unit configured on their environment, and talking to both of their critical systems, which one was a Windows remote desktop application and the other was an IBM ERP system. Right now, they still have that demo device because their devices are being shipped and they actually don't want to give it back to us until their new ones arrive. So they definitely had a lot of positive experiences with all of their employees, and they didn't see any disruption at all moving from their legacy Windows devices to their Android OS devices. And finally, we want to touch on how Lowry can help you with this, because by now you should be asking yourself and know kind of what's your roadmap to success going to be, or at least like what is Android OS, why migrate, and what the benefits of Android OS migration are. Lowry is happy to partner with you to make that happen. This will be touched on extensively in our final third part of this series, and that'll be done by Al Rivet, who is our sales director. And basically, we break it into 4 steps. We do the scoping and planning with you, shoulder to shoulder, so you're never on your own. The design and implementation, you got to make sure that there's compatibility, that the apps are going to work. You don't want anyone to be stranded. The testing and validation is critical, as David mentioned, because you're doing development sometimes on a different environment, different platform. If you have Windows developers, they might have a little reluctance to move into an Android platform to do development. And then finally, the piloting and the training, and then the continued support are things that are offered through the service contracts and other professional service offerings. So I'm going to pause for a second and just take a couple questions from the chat box. Okay, so we have one for Dave. So Dave, what happens on the day that Windows no longer supports any of the patches or updates?
Yeah, so along the lines of, will the devices still work? Sure. Yeah, your devices are still going to work. Windows CE, Windows Mobile, on that latest release that you have in your environment, it's still going to continue to operate. The issue being that you will no longer be able to get radio patches, security patches, any of the what they used to call, I think, AKUs, will be provided to the OEM vendors and in turn to the devices. That's what stops. So yep, devices will still work, but no more security updates, none of that. And we know from some of the hacks that we've seen that once a vulnerability is identified, then that word starts to get out there, and more people go after it. So if they find a vulnerability in Windows Mobile or Windows CE, they start turning their sights on those types of devices. So all that information is shared and amongst people writing malware and those sorts of things, and it's just it's just protecting yourself. So that's why we're recommending, hey, plan your migration, get onto Android, and keep up with those security patches.
Perfect. And that answers the second question that just came in, which was, does the end of Windows Mobile support mean the beginning of security vulnerabilities? And the answer is yes, it absolutely does. There's a question for Kevin from Zebra. As an IT administrator, am I able to control the forced Android OS upgrades?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and the answer to that is yes. That's part of what our execution of this patch strategy and our lifeguard brings to the table. As new vulnerabilities get exposed, we have a regular monthly cadence of releasing patches, against these vulnerabilities, and it gives you the opportunity, you as the end user, you as the administrator, the opportunity to examine the patches, to assess whether the vulnerability is exposed within your environment or not, and then you make the decision on when you want to deploy those patches. Typically they're deployed through your MDM, and they're not deployed out to you as the case would be in a typical consumer environment. It gives you a very high degree of control.
Excellent. And then Dave, one more for you. Isn't Android open source? Doesn't that make the OS vulnerable?
So that's a good question. Yeah, and not necessarily. So yes, it is open source. Does it make it vulnerable? Not necessarily if you keep up with, again, the security patches. What open source has caused is there's now an availability of tools to even folks that maybe haven't coded that long or aren't coders at all. There's tools that have been built to help exploit the mobile devices, desktop devices, and with Android that opens that up, and because that tool set's available, it kind of opens up who has access to them, right? So somebody doesn't have to be that good of a developer anymore to actually to crack into a device. So I think we talked about having an EMM tool in the environment so that you can keep up with those patches, following best practices around security. It's extremely critical, and I think that's why we enforce it so much.
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit on the security side, Android itself is inherently secure. They apply techniques as far as running applications within what they'll call an application sandbox, or a random allocation of memory plots where applications gets executed. So it makes it very difficult, even more so than what would be on a standard desktop PC or laptop. It makes it very difficult to do precise memory attacks on applications. Secondarily, with the patch strategy in place, these vulnerabilities get addressed pretty quickly. One of the advantages of Android being an open source platform, it gives vendors like us the ability to create and release those updates and do so in such a controllable manner that gives you the ability to make a decision on when those get released.
Excellent. And then in closing today, we're going to try and give everyone about 5 minutes back on the hour here. Just a summary that Lowry Solutions and Zebra, we're very close partners, and we are here 100% to help you through this. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. We encourage everyone who's attending today to go to lowrysolutions.com/Android for more information. We're coming up on the deadline here. I mean, you do this on your own time, but you can't ignore it forever. So it is important to start building the awareness and really start trying to make a blueprint of what a migration might look like. And then our final webinar that we'll be hosting, the third and final one, is called Developing an OS Migration Strategy, Your Roadmap to Success. That's Wednesday, October 17th, 2018 at 2 p.m. We'll be going very in-depth into exactly how you can create your OS migration strategy and be successful in completing your migration across your entire business. So again, we want to thank everybody for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you in the third and final webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.